I am Dr. Ray Dykes, and this is the Personal Faith Program. This is a Christmas podcast. Christmas is the great celebration of physical birth and physical life, just as Easter is the celebration of spiritual birth and spiritual life. We celebrate the physical birth and physical life of Jesus, and I celebrate your physical birth and physical life and my own at this season of the year. It's about the season when the sun starts coming back, and throughout the centuries, people have celebrated this time of year as a new beginning time, a birth time. I want to remind you that the birth stories of Jesus in the New Testament, one comes in the Gospel of Matthew, written around 75 in Alexandria, Egypt, and the other written about 5 to 10 years later in the Gospel dedicated to Luke, written in Antioch of Syria. And they're very different, very different birth stories. They have the only thing in common that they have is that Jesus was born, and that Mary and Joseph were around. The birth story in Matthew is the first one written, and it simply says that Mary became pregnant by the Holy Spirit, and Joseph decided to keep her. And and the story in Matthew, the birth story in Matthew, is about Joseph. I mean, it focuses on Joseph because this is the Jewish Egyptian gospel, and Joseph was a Jewish Egyptian hero in the Old Testament. The young fellow who became the Secretary of Agriculture for the Pharaoh of Egypt. It is Joseph who has the dream in that birth story in Matthew, where he and the angel talk about what to do. And as a matter of fact, later after Jesus is born, there's another dream where he's told to get out of town and go to Egypt. In the Matthew story, you do not have the census that you do in Luke, the Roman census that tells them that gets them to Bethlehem. But it does say in Matthew's gospel that Jesus was born in Bethlehem, even though many scholars today would strongly argue that Jesus was born in Nazareth, and that the story of being born in Bethlehem came about as a result of the prophecies or the declarations in the Old Testament in the Hebrew Bible saying that the Messiah would come from Bethlehem, the tribal headquarters of the tribe of Judah, which is the tribe of David. The story in Matthew also has the wise men, the Magi, the Mobads, the Zoroastrian Mobads coming to Jerusalem, looking for this new king, and eventually going down to Bethlehem, presenting the gifts, and going back home. It has the story of Herod, the king, sending soldiers to Bethlehem to kill the babies. That is in the story in Matthew. And then also in Matthew, after Joseph and Mary and Jesus go to Egypt and come back out of Egypt, they come back and go to Nazareth. In the Matthew story, they never go to Jerusalem. They skip Jerusalem and go back to Nazareth. Then in the Luke story is told from a female perspective, because the scribe of the Gospel of Luke is a woman. And so the first two chapters of Luke have to do with Elizabeth, the mother of John the Baptist, and Mary and their pregnancies and so forth as they proceed to have these two babies. The angel appears to Mary in the Luke story, as opposed to Joseph in the Matthew story. There's a census in the Luke story that gets them to Bethlehem. Once the baby is born in Bethlehem, you have shepherds coming to the site of the birth, and which you don't have in Matthew. There are no wise men coming in the Luke story as there are in Matthew, and there are no soldiers coming to Bethlehem to kill the babies in the Luke story as you have in Matthew. In fact, in the Luke story, after Jesus is born, Mary and Joseph take Jesus up to Jerusalem for his circumcision at the temple. They're right there in Jerusalem. They're very interesting that the two different stories present themselves, and yet usually at Christmas time there's an intentional desire to meld them into one story. They're really quite two different stories, each making the point, of course, of the virgin birth, which is a very contentious issue in Christianity, and which to be reminded that there are many virgin births stories in this time of the birth of Jesus. Augustus Caesar was said to have been born of a virgin. You have the story of Dionysus, who was born of a virgin princess of Thebes in Egypt. You have lots of virgin births. There are ways in which people honored people that they loved and adored very much. You gave them a virgin birth if you wanted to raise them up in public opinion. The stories, though, of the birth of Jesus contain a lot of symbols that make it possible for you and me to identify with the birth of Jesus and identify with Jesus. Some of the in the stories, the symbols that present themselves, and if we think symbolically, for example, there was a Roman census involved in getting in the Luke story in order to get Mary and Joseph to Bethlehem. And so there was some paperwork involved, and in your birth, there was paperwork involved in your birth certificate, so that you can identify with that aspect and that symbol in the birth story. They went to Bethlehem, and there Bethlehem means the house of bread, Beit Lehem, house of bread, and so you were born in a house, hopefully, that had plenty of food in it, identifying with that. The places where they probably where Jesus was born was not a Holiday Inn. It was not a stable at the back of a Holiday Inn. It was a cave. People in Bethlehem at that time lived in the caves in the limestone rock around there, and so these caves were symbols of a womb. They were cut back into the rock, and they were womb-like, and so that also having to do with your gestation in the womb and your birth. Swaddling clothes. When it says in Luke that when Jesus was born, he was wrapped in swaddling clothes and laid in a manger. And by the way, a manger is not a little wooden manger. It was a trough. It was a trough that was carved out of that limestone in that cave, and in which they put the food for the animals, which were in the back of the cave. That's the way kept their animals back in those days, and so the swaddling clothes. Reminiscent of you being wrapped up. In the nurseries, they always wrap the babies up in swaddling clothes, and so that you can identify with in your own birth as well. Um, the feeding trough itself is a symbol. It's a symbol that you were fed as quickly as possible, so that you would have the nourishment that you needed to grow. Shepherds. The shepherds came. The shepherds were, if Joseph, as it says, was of the tribe of Judah, then these shepherds would have been his cousins, and so these cousins came and were there to be of assistance at the time of the birth. Shepherds are very much involved with birthing of the sheep, so they're very familiar with that process, as were doctors and nurses who were around you when you were born, or at least a midwife, or a police officer in the back of a cab, or whatever. Somebody was there as a shepherd when you were born. Identification with the birth of Jesus. Choirs of angels are said in Luke to have sung to these shepherds out there in the field. Well, there were choirs of angels when you were born as well. There were announcements that were put out about your birth. Probably something in the newspaper. Some cards were sent out. Angels mean messengers, and so these messages went out through messengers at the time you were born. Identification for you with the birth of Jesus, and so this birth story of Jesus gives us opportunity to identify with Jesus, and it's important, I think, to identify with Jesus. How do we love that which we don't identify with? How do we care for that which we don't identify with? I profess to love the symbolic Jesus. I profess to love the Jesus that stands for God's great symbol of spiritual death and spiritual resurrection for the whole world. And so identifying with Jesus' birth is an important thing, I think, for us to think about during this Christmas season. And may you have a joyous Christmas, and I'll see you next time.